morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. A big development concerning Prince Andrew this morning, and a first look at his denials contained in legal papers, plus fresh pressure on the Prime Minister as he waits for the Sue Gray report after a whistleblower's claims on the evacuation of animals from Afghanistan. We'll speak to the Work and Pensions Secretary Therese Coffey. It is Thursday, the 27th of January. Revealed the documents from Prince Andrew's lawyers responding to claims of sex assault allegations as he asks for a jury trial.
Put her up, but I put her on Mac.
OK, there's Milena. She is, as you can see, at Windsor. She'll have the latest. Selling their kidneys to feed themselves. Our special correspondent Alex Crawford investigates the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. More revelations about the evacuation of animals from Afghanistan as pressure on the PM grows. We'll analyse that. Police reveal the shocking kidnapping video showing the moment a teenager is kidnapped by her former boyfriend. What happened next was even more tragic. Slice of normality returns. We get reaction from businesses as COVID restrictions lift in England.
I'm in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, as Sky News understands that the UK could be sending hundreds more troops to bolster NATO's eastern flank in Eastern Europe.
Also on the programme for you this morning. And perhaps goodbye reports that Adele won't now play a single show in Vegas after postponing her residency. And feel the rhythm, feel the rhyme at 8:45. It's bobsled time. We'll speak to the Jamaican bobsleigh team, so committed to their sport. They did this to train about how their Winter Olympic dream was nearly thrown off track. Good morning, everybody. The big breaking news you're waking up to this morning is about Prince Andrew, and we've got the first proper glimpse of his denials about sex assault claims made by Virginia Giuffre. Legal documents setting out the Prince's response to the sexual assault case reveal his formal denials. Prince Andrew is asking for a trial by jury. Then, in response to the claim, Ms Giuffre was forced to have sex with Prince Andrew. The document says Prince Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations in paragraph 27 of the complaint pertaining to the alleged abuse of Giuffre at the hands of Epstein, and denies the remaining allegations contained in this paragraph. In response to paragraph 38 of the original complaint, which refers to the photograph shown here, the document says Prince Andrew lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations contained in paragraph 38 of the complaint. And in paragraph 53 of the original complaint, it's claimed that after Andrew had been accused of sexually assaulting Giuffre, he emailed Gillian Maxwell stating, "Let me know when we can talk. Got some specific questions to ask you about Virginia Roberts." In response to this, the document from Andrew's lawyers once again states that he lacks sufficient information to admit or deny the allegations. We're going to be going to Windsor throughout the course of the programme today. Milena's standing by for us, and she'll update us very shortly. Before that, though, let's bring in the Government Minister this morning, Therese Coffey, of course, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. Hello.
Good morning.
It's lovely to see you. Thanks for coming in. Let's just get Sue Gray out of the way quickly. When will we get the report?
I don't know. I'm conscious that for Sue Gray to finalise her report, you will probably know quicker than I will, UK, but it's important that that be allowed to continue, as indeed the PM said about the police investigation.
And it's being held up her end, but we don't have a sense of why that is.
I really don't know. I know that the government's committed to publishing the full findings of the report, and that but the timing I absolutely have no idea about.
OK. Did you ever go to any parties at Downing Street?
I'm not aware of any parties at Downing Street, but it's important that Sue Gray's report is allowed to be published and the police be allowed to the investigations.
But did you ever go?
I'm not aware of any parties. I go to the Downing Street regularly, things like talking about jobs, like discussing things like the Way to Work campaign that we're launching today.
We're going to be talking about that in more detail, but did you ever go to any parties at Downing Street?
Have I ever been to any parties in Downing Street? The last party I recall going to Downing Street was the celebration of when the UK left the European Union following the referendum, and that was because Boris got Brexit done.
Yeah.
And he will continue to deliver.
Yeah. Was there a cake?
I don't recall any cake. The last cake I remember is the one at the Sky News party with my face on one of it. I was literally pictured eating my own face, but there we go. So
there's got to be a gag in there somewhere, hasn't there? You know, we're talking about bits of cake that he potentially ate 2 years ago. We're being told that he wants to be more statesmanlike and doesn't want to be his memory to be of things like that as far as the public is concerned. Yet he intervenes airlifting animals out of Afghanistan. What did he do that for?
Well, the PM's been clear that he had no individual decisions on all those individual elements of operations. You know, as Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, has said, it was a military operation. Ben was in charge as Defence Secretary. And I'm conscious that absolutely people were absolutely prioritised. You know, our brave armed forces worked really hard to get 15,000 British nationals and Afghans out of Kabul in that very difficult time, and they're being rewarded for that with medals as a part of Operation Pitting.
Yeah, but he's been caught lying again because he said that he didn't have anything to do with it.
Well, the PM didn't make any individual decisions about evacuations.
Let me just remind you what he said at the time. Here we go. Yes, please.
I had absolutely no influence on any particular case, nor would that be right. That's not how we do things in this country.
Well, I think he said he had no particular influence on individual cases like Nowzad and Pen Farthing.
Have a look at this email then from the Foreign Office official reading, here we go, equivalent charity Nowzad run by an ex-Royal Marine has received a lot of publicity and the PM has just authorised their staff and animals to be evacuated.
Well, the PM has been clear in what he said. The Defence Secretary, who was in charge of the military operation, has been clear as well. The PM didn't ask him to do anything like that. You know, I'll be open with you, there's quite a lot of people will often claim the role of the PM in supporting...
Just authorised their staff and animals to be evacuated.
A lot of people will claim that the PM's involved in supporting their particular pet projects, but the PM said he wasn't involved in individual decisions. That's what the Defence Secretary, who was in charge of Operation Pitting overall, has said as well. And I think it's important the Defence Secretary is absolutely right. He prioritised people and we were successful in getting thousands of people out.
It was just before the end of the evacuation of as many people and animals as we could. It had to be authorised either by a Cabinet Secretary or by the Prime Minister.
Well, the Defence Secretary
are all over it.
The Defence Secretary is clear that he was in charge of the operation and the PM did not ask him to do that. Also, the PM's, I think, spokesperson is saying he was not involved in any individual decisions. And I'm absolutely confident that Ben will have done the right thing in trying to get as many people out of Afghanistan at that time as possible.
Dominic Dyer, who is a friend of Carrie Johnson, said to LBC, actually, yesterday, that the charity had lobbied all the ministers about the charter flight, as well as the PM's wife, and he had hoped that the PM's wife would speak to the Prime Minister. To that end, Trudy Harrison, an MP and aide to the PM, trying to charter a flight on the 25th of August, saying the boss wants them to get out.
Well, a lot of people will have been lobbied. I recall the extensive number of emails I had as well at the time. And I'm conscious, as I say, there was... I can't recall how many emails I received, but there was a lot of concern at the time about what was happening, but the PM did not get involved in the individual evacuation decisions.
Are you sure?
And Ben Wallace, I am sure, because Ben Wallace also was saying that as Defence Secretary yesterday as well.
OK, there's nobody more than me is an animal lover. I absolutely love animals, but I would not prioritise animals over people. You are absolutely confident that the Prime Minister didn't do that?
I'm absolutely confident.
Despite all the evidence to the contrary?
Well, the evidence is clear also from the Defence Secretary, who's spoken on this at length in the last, I think, 24, 48 hours. OK,
183 people died in a suicide bomb attack. Those who had supported Britain for 20 years were left behind. Only the PM and a government minister could make things happen towards the end. We had heard from the Defence Secretary, who had said that it was complete bollocks, using his terminology, to try to get them out. He did not want to prioritise pets over people. And then it all turned around. Dominic Dyer is saying he'd lobbied the Prime Minister's wife to make that happen?
Well, I've no doubt a lot of lobbying happened, as I explained. I recall as an MP, just like others will have done, will have had a lot of emails. But I will say that Ben Wallace has been clear. He was in charge of Operation Pitting, and the PM did not ask him to do any individual kind of evacuations. And the PM has said that as well.
OK, someone's lying, aren't they? PM doesn't have a good track record when it comes to lying. He was sacked twice for lying, and he's been caught telling porkies again over Partygate. But you still preferred, or you want my viewers to believe that he's not lying and the other evidence is wrong?
I think I'm not just denying that Dominic Dyer has said that people lobbied ministers. They did, and they are MPs as well.
And the
but
email
I think
from Lord Goldsmith's office.
I think that the situation is that the PM is involved in a number of different elements. He trusts Ben Wallace to run that successful evacuation strategy under Operation Pitting, and our armed forces who were involved are going to be rewarded with medals thanks to the Queen's permission for that. But overall, there are a number of different things the PM is doing really well, getting the big decisions on right, the success of the booster vaccine campaign. And that's why we're able to move forward today, the first day, stepping away from Plan B into Plan A. And I hope soon that we will continue to learn to live with COVID. And that's one of the reasons we're stepping up how we're helping people get into work through our Way to Work programme.
OK, let's go back to Afghanistan. And now we've had the party political broadcast. We heard that from the dispatch box several times as well yesterday, and all of your colleagues have recounted those facts to us throughout the week. £286 million had been allocated to Afghanistan this fiscal year to try to help the people there. 145 million, a little over half, has been given so far. Why are we holding this money back? People are selling their kidneys so they can eat.
Well, that will be a decision on how the Foreign Office will be allocating aspects of different funds. We continue through our foreign aid budget to also spend a lot of money through multilateral agencies. That has continued extensively, and we will continue to support not only Afghanistan but countries around the world needing our help.
Having their kidneys cut out so that they can get some money so they can eat.
I understand why it was and continues to be a difficult situation for a lot of people. Do remember that we've also extended a settlement scheme for people to come and live in this country. People have already arrived. I know through my own department we're trying to help them get into work, as well as the other aspects as part of Operation Warm Welcome. So I think that we are doing a lot to try and help people who understandably have endured a very difficult time when the Taliban
Looking at that,
resumed.
do you think it's enough?
Well, I'm conscious that around the world, that different countries will continue to work together to try and do what they can to help people in Afghanistan. But ultimately, we are doing our bit with our up to 20,000 people to come into this country. But that's already happened and is separate to the scheme that was in place for people who had helped, in particular, the UK government during that time.
What about what we're doing at home? Inflation's running at a 30-year high. I think I'm right in saying, according to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, 27% of children are living in poverty. 27%, my goodness me. Should we scrap the national insurance rise?
Well, the national insurance rise has already been voted through by Parliament, and it's an important way of making sure initially we support the NHS, but also that longer-term social care support, which we have committed to doing. So I think it's important to recognise, I think it's 1 in 7 of earners will be paying more than half of the levy that will be generated. So the top 14% of earners will pay over half of what will be collected through that. And actually 6 million people of the lowest earners won't be paying anything extra at all. So there's a number of ways that we're helping people, a household support fund, getting more people into work so they'll be better off financially, helping them and their families to make sure that they can continue to have a better life and also improve their mental well-being too.
Yeah, more than a quarter of kids are living in poverty. We're not doing enough, are we?
Well, there's a statistical element that comes, Kay, with defining who's living in poverty.
What's your definition of poverty?
The connection of poverty in a statistical term is about 60% of median earnings compared to other people. I'm more focused on the material deprivation aspect. That's why we've also put in place a £500 million household support fund over winter to particularly help. But definitely the best way to get out of poverty is for people to be working. And in a household where both mum and dad, or both mum and mum, or dad and dad are working, it's very unlikely that their children will be in poverty. And that's why I'm focusing about getting an extra 500,000 people
That's
back
just not
into
true,
work.
though, Minister, is it? I mean, I work at a food bank on a Friday, and I see a lot of people who come along, and if they didn't come to that food bank, they wouldn't eat.
I'm flagging that one of the best ways is...
They work as well. Some of them have got 2 jobs and they still don't earn enough money to...
Well, where you have both parents working, it's very unlikely, or it's something like 3% chance of people being in poverty. But there's a number of things we're doing in terms of the national living wage will be going up from April. Also, we've already introduced something where you keep more of your money while you're still on in-work benefits. And those are ways that we are trying to help families as well. And the best way that I can help them is to try and make sure they get into work.
OK, and to that end, you're reducing benefits after people have been looking for work from 12 weeks down to 4 weeks. Why are you doing that?
That's not the case. What happens is that often when people are especially new into looking for work, our regime had been to say you've got 3 months to find something that's in your sector or similar. We know there's over 1 million vacancies out there right now, a lot of them in key sectors. So for new people coming into the job centre, we can say, OK, we're going to try and help you get back into your chosen sector within a month. If you can't do it then we're saying to you it's important to get back into work. So we want you to take a job of which you are capable, because it's always easier to get work once you're in work. And so going from an any job to a better job to a career process. I'm conscious that we still have well over 1 million people looking for work. A lot of those have been doing that for over a year now. The longer you are out of work, the more difficult it can be to get back. So instead of the job of your choice, we're saying, come on, the experience you will gain will be tremendous in helping you get into work, get more money in your pocket. And not only are we delivering workers for the economy, will be helping people with their prosperity. So the big change not only is for people looking for work, it's actually about bringing employers back into the job centres and really trying to short-circuit the process of people being connected, being, frankly, a lot of matchmaking going on so that we can fill the critical jobs. People like the supply chain, warehousing are crying out for support, as well as the care sector as well.
OK, Multiple Sclerosis Society talking this morning, saying it will cause huge amounts of anxiety and stress.
Well, in terms of people with different medical conditions may not actually be being asked to look for work, and that's not part of this. This is about people who taxpayers are paying week in, week out to look for work. What we're trying to do is to accelerate the process of getting people back into work and filling the critical sector vacancies, which we know our economy needs to do. Over 1 million vacancies out there. People can get work, and we will be doing our bit to make sure they get into a job. OK. Let
me just go full circle before I let you go. Prime Minister yesterday at the dispatch box said that it was right that if a Prime Minister misled Parliament, that he should step down. You agree with that? I think what is fair to say... The Prime Minister said it. Well, the Prime Minister said what he said at the dispatch box. It's important to make sure that we continue to wait for the appropriate investigations to be underway, and that's exactly what we're doing. Well, one of them's completed, they're arguing about, and to that end, we've seen that it has been given to the police. Our Prime Minister likely to be investigated by the police under caution. My goodness me. Well, you know even more of the details than I do, Kay, on that. But I do know that the PM has said it's right that the police should be allowed to investigate. You know, they have operational independence, and that's appropriate to do. So you believe him on that, but you also believe in that when he says that if he's misled Parliament, then he should go? I'm saying that the PM stood up and said what he said yesterday, and I was in the chamber, and I think it's fair to say we need to wait for the investigations to be completed. The government will be publishing the full findings of the report, but the police have a separate independent investigation, and it's their choice to decide what to do. What I do hope is that, you know, by completing their investigations, we'll be able to, you know, get clarity exactly on what happened, and, you know, the decisions that will still need to be made, and we are still making in running this country, whether it's about decisions on vaccines, whether it's about the change into Plan A and where we go beyond, including, you know, things that are operating in terms of trying to generate jobs. So that's what we keep focused on right now while other people complete their investigations. Looking for the clarity. So say all of us. It's good to see you as always. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Minister. Thank you. Let's return to our top story, should we now, on Prince Andrew and see how the papers are covering that story this morning. Prince Andrew's trial leads The Sun this morning. Their headline, "I'll go to trial, no sweat," is, of course, a reference to the Duke's previous claim that he couldn't sweat. The Express labels the jury trial demand a shock. The Metro says that decision means Prince Andrew has rejected the chance of an out-of-court settlement with Ms Giuffre. That's their interpretation. Milena is at Windsor Castle for us this morning. Hi, Milena. Thanks for travelling all that way for us this morning. It's a beautiful time of day, isn't it, to see the castle. I wonder how the Prince is feeling this morning.
Well, judging by his latest application to the court, feeling quite combative. This will really be the first time in modern times that we'll see a royal being cross-examined, facing his accuser in a trial by jury. And it is really a continuation of the Prince's quest to fight these allegations by Virginia Giuffre. She alleges that she was sexually abused by the Prince more than 20 years ago when she was just 17. These are allegations that he had always strenuously denied. In fact, he tried to, just this month, dismiss this case, which he was unsuccessful. After that, the Queen had stripped him of his military honours, and the royal family had tried to distance themselves from this scandal, but the Prince perseveres. In response to this, Virginia Giuffre's lawyers have said that this all smacks of victim blaming, and her lawyer, David Boris, said in a statement, "We look forward to confronting Prince Andrew with his denials and attempts to blame Ms Giuffre for her own abuse at his deposition and at trial." It's worth mentioning that Mr Boris is one of the most fierce trial lawyers in the US, so this will definitely not be an easy ride for Prince Andrew. It does threaten to overshadow the Queen's Platinum Jubilee this year. OK, Milena, thank you. Well, as we were discussing with the Minister a moment ago, the United Nations has warned that Afghanistan is fast becoming the world's worst humanitarian disaster. Sky News has spoken to people who have sold their kidneys to buy food and life-saving medicines, and some are now considering even more desperate measures, like selling their children. Our special correspondent Alex Crawford reports from Herat, and a warning: her report contains pictures of abdominal scarring from recently harvested kidneys.
They've all sold their kidneys to survive. The organ trade isn't new in Afghanistan, but it's just got more desperate. Every single person here is hungry, and poverty is driving already poor people to even more extreme measures. This man tells us we've no choice. We've already sold our kidneys. Now we've got to sell our children. And they're suffering terribly. The Taliban takeover meant a massive cut in aid, and these are people with few options. We've taken efforts to conceal their identities for their own safety. It's a highly conservative society, but I'm allowed into a room with the women. They agree to me filming their scars, some just a few months old. The women have sold their kidneys for less than the men, around $1,500 an organ. There's a lucrative trade with many organs going to Iran, but the money's still not enough. Most of these women are still teenagers with multiple babies but few rights. And now they're being forced to sell their children so they all have a better chance of survival. No one can tell me to sell my children, but we're struggling to keep them alive, she says. And that's why we've thought of selling them. Maybe better for them, and we get food for the others. It is a tragic situation, and one they see no quick end to.
There's a lot of women there who've sold their kidneys and now thinking of the last option, which is selling their children too.
The aid is fought over. What's here is far outweighed by the huge need. It's really very hard in Afghanistan right now, she says, and there are too many people like me who don't have a husband or a father to support them. Back at the community outside Herat, where whole families have already sold their kidneys, we're with the village elder who's urgently trying to persuade this family not to sell one of their babies. I urge the world, please don't leave us alone, he says. Stop this tragedy when people are selling their children or part of their bodies. But both parents have already sold their kidneys. They've already lost a child who starved to death, and they still have 8 little mouths to feed. I've already lost one. I can't see them all lose their lives, she says. At least someone else will feed them. These are decisions no parent wants to make. But hunger can break even a mother's bond with her babies. Alex Crawford, Sky News, Herat.
We'll get the latest reaction to the ongoing crisis in Afghanistan later this morning, where we'll speak to the UNHCR Afghanistan spokesperson Peter Kessler and the former Defence Minister, now Chair of the Defence Committee, Tobias Ellwood, from 9 a.m. CCTV footage has been released showing the moment a teenage girl was kidnapped by her controlling former boyfriend before she fell out of a van on a dual carriageway. This is the moment Angel Lynn was snatched from a street in Leicestershire and thrown into a silver van. The 19-year-old subsequently fell out of the vehicle and was found by a passerby with catastrophic injuries and remains in hospital 2 years later, needing round-the-clock care for the foreseeable future. On Wednesday, Che Boskill was found guilty of kidnap, coercive and controlling behaviour and perverting the course of justice. He was sentenced to a total of 7.5 years in jail. His accomplice, Rocco Sansom, was handed a 21-month-long sentence for kidnap. Still to come on the programme for you. As the wait continues for Sue Gray's report into parties at Downing Street, speaking to the chair of the Common Standards Committee, there he is, Chris Bryant. That's at 8:30. In addition to that, on the programme for you this morning, a place to mark a memorial Holocaust Day. We'll speak to Israel's ambassador to the UK. And we're going to chat to an actor raising funds to help fellow patients with blood cancer after being given 2 months to live. Looking at some of today's other headlines for you now. A 32-year-old man in Texas has been charged with firearms offences by police investigating the hostage-taking at a synagogue earlier this month. Henry Williams sold a pistol to Malik Faisal Akram, originally from Blackburn, 2 days before the hostage-taking. Akram was shot dead by police at the scene. North Korea has fired 2 suspected short-range ballistic missiles into the sea, according to South Korea's military. This is North Korea's 6th round of weapons tests this month. Both the US and Japan have condemned the move. Plan B COVID rules introduced to slow the spread of Omicron in England have now ended. And the breaking news on the bottom of your screen this morning is that the government has eased social care restrictions, meaning unlimited visits for care home residents is to return. That's the latest that we're hearing. And then from today, face coverings are no longer required by law in any public setting, except for London transport services. But public health guidance on masks remains, with advice that they should still be worn in crowded and enclosed spaces. For venues and events, COVID passes are no longer compulsory to gain entry. And self-isolation for people who test positive for COVID will be scrapped by the 24th of March, although this date could be brought forward. Here's Gerard Tubb.
At this pizza restaurant in Warwick, England's relaxation of restrictions back to Plan A is welcome. Face masks are no longer compulsory, but like many hospitality settings, they'll have their own rules.
The staff have said that they want to continue wearing masks, and we're quite happy with that. The front of house staff especially, they're worried for customers as well as for themselves.
For England's big events and venues like nightclubs, the big change is COVID passes becoming voluntary again. At Bar Fibre in Leeds, the owner, Terry George, campaigned against them being introduced and is now delighted.
So I think the hospitality industry and ourselves are going to see things lifting a little. It's going to make it easier for people to come in. Really looking forward to it. I hope that this is the last we see of it. I hope that things are now on the up and then it's going to give us a boost that we need.
Despite the change in rules, public health guidance in England stays the same. Individuals should continue to wear a face covering in crowded and enclosed spaces. For the extremely vulnerable, the shift to personal responsibility is being seen as a backward step. Outside his home in Keighley, acute asthma sufferer Aaron Folds told me he's been shielding almost continuously for 2 years.
I can't imagine there's many people that would intentionally hurt somebody, you know. So why not wear a mask?
with mask-wearing rules still in place in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, England is now the least restricted part of the UK. Gerard Tubb, Sky News, Keighley.
Sky News understands the UK is considering sending hundreds more troops to bolster NATO's flank in Eastern Europe ahead of any potential Russian invasion of Ukraine. It comes after the US rejected President Putin's demand that Ukraine should be barred from joining NATO. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, is in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, joins us now. I was listening to people on the radio this morning, Dominic, who are in the capital, not knowing what's going to happen next. They're very concerned and anxious.
Yeah, they're in a state of limbo, Kay, caught between sort of normality, carrying on with life, and the threat of looming conflict. And they're watching closely as to what's been happening in Moscow, where America's ambassador delivered that written reply to Vladimir Putin's demands about NATO, Ukraine and security in Eastern Europe. And they also will be listening to the news that Britain is considering sending hundreds more troops to Ukraine's neighbours, even before an invasion could possibly happen. And Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary in Berlin, meeting his German counterpart, kind of summarising what the Allies are doing and admitting there is a sort of cross-section of support that NATO's trying to give Ukraine to ward off this threat of Russian aggression against it.
We can all assist Ukraine in our own way. Obviously, the United Kingdom has taken a view that lethal aid of a tactical defensive nature is something that the Ukrainians need. But we're not sitting in judgment over other countries. I think with 30 allies, there are plenty of assistances to go round.
As we said, Britain is considering sending troops, is sending anti-tank missiles. Germany yesterday said it will send one field hospital and 5,000 helmets, and that's been criticised by the mayor of this town, Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, who said, what are the Germans going to send next? Pillows?
Yeah. For now, thanks very much indeed, Dominic. Thank you. 6 young people are taking legal action against the operator of Japan's stricken Fukushima nuclear plant, claiming they developed thyroid cancer after exposure to radiation. Let's get more, should we? Tom's standing by for us in Beijing. Hi, Tom. What more do we know about this?
Hi, Kay. Yeah, I mean, if you think back to the Fukushima disaster, the earthquake, then the tsunami, and the meltdown of the plant, that was the worst nuclear accident since Chernobyl. And what happened after Chernobyl, actually, was that they noticed a large number of thyroid cancer cases in children following that. And so ever since Fukushima, what the authorities there have been doing have been screening for thyroid cancer, mass testing for thyroid cancer, to see if there's any effect. Now, these 6 individuals, they're young adults now, they're between 6 and 16 when the disaster happened, say they all developed thyroid cancer, and they believe it was due to the radiation from the Fukushima link. All of them had to go surgery, and they're suing the electric company that ran the plant for around £4 million. Now, the regional authorities say there's no link between thyroid cancer and radiation. They haven't established one so far. A UN committee said the higher levels of thyroid cancer might be due to this increased screening, that mass testing, so they're just looking harder and finding more cases as a result. This lawsuit will put that to the test in a court in Tokyo, but it's also just a reminder that even more than a decade on from that disaster, its ripples are still being felt to the present day.
OK, thanks, Tom. Thank you. Now, after cancelling her Vegas shows due to COVID and production issues, it was expected Adele would reschedule the dates in the coming months. Far from saying hello, it looks as though she may well be saying goodbye to the Vegas Strip. Caesars Palace, the venue, is where she was supposed to be performing. It's now booked the country music star Carl Urban for 5 shows in March and April. Dates originally reserved for Adele's live shows. Parts of her stage sets have also been removed from the venue, casting further doubt that fans will get to see her rolling in the deep on the Strip this year. Looking at our top stories for you on the programme this morning, Prince Andrew has demanded a trial by jury in the civil sexual assault case brought against him by Virginia Giuffre. He denies all claims made against him. We have been speaking to Afghans who sold their kidneys for food and medicine as the United Nations warns of the country becoming the world's worst humanitarian disaster. And back to Plan A. COVID restrictions are eased in England with mandatory face coverings dropped. Care home residents will also be able to receive unlimited visitors from Monday. Well, in the last half hour or so, I was pressing the Work and Pensions Secretary Therese Coffey about accusations that Boris Johnson lied over whether he authorised the evacuations of animals linked to the charity Nowzad from Afghanistan last summer. Despite email evidence to the contrary, she appeared to back the Prime Minister.
The PM has been clear in what he said. The Defence Secretary, who was in charge of the military operation, has been clear as well. The PM didn't ask him to do anything like that. You know, I'll be open with you. There's quite a lot of people will often claim the role of the PM in supporting.
Just authorised their staff and animals to be evacuated.
A lot of people will claim that the PM's involved in supporting their particular pet projects, but the PM said he wasn't involved in individual decisions. That's what the Defence Secretary, who was in charge of Operation Pitting overall, has said as well. And I think it's important the Defence Secretary is absolutely right. He prioritised people and we were successful in getting thousands of people out.
So despite all the evidence tomorrow, no.
Yes, while the Prime Minister's conduct and integrity are being questioned in the Sue Gray report, which we're still waiting for, they're being questioned again in this Afghan evacuation, which has now come back because there it is in emails in black and white between ministers' offices saying the Prime Minister has told us to evacuate the animals and staff from this charity. This was at quite a late stage in the evacuation. Now, the Prime Minister and indeed the Defence Secretary both denied that yesterday, and I thought it was interesting that Therese Coffey said several times that she would back the Defence Secretary to do the right thing in this situation. So what went on? Well, she's suggesting maybe officials got the wrong end of the stick. She said people often lobby the Prime Minister and maybe it was misunderstood. But I think questions are going to continue on this subject, not least because a man called Dominic Dyer, an animal rights campaigner who is friends with the Prime Minister and his wife, Carrie, has made very clear that he asked for them to intervene. And as the Foreign Office whistleblower who provided these emails to MPs has said, it must have been authorised at a very high level.
OK, thanks very much indeed. Tomorrow's take at 9 o'clock. Looking forward to it. Thank you. Meantime, events are taking place across the UK to mark Holocaust Memorial Day. People are being encouraged to light candles in their windows at 8 p.m. this evening, while the Prince of Wales has commissioned paintings of Holocaust survivors. Joining us now is Israel's ambassador to the UK, Zippy Hoshaveli. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. More than 70 years have passed since the Holocaust. Still very much in people's memories, though, isn't it?
Yes, for us, it's a very personal day, like many other Jews and Israelis, because my husband is a grandson of a survivor. His grandfather, Samuel Freiberg, was a survivor from 8 different camps. One of them is Auschwitz. And for my husband, the Holocaust was very present in his life. And just for me, just teaching and educating the young generation is probably the biggest mission, because unfortunately, my daughters will never get to hear the witness of Samuel Freiberg, their grandfather. And we need to think how the world is going to look like without survivors. This is why I think what the Secretary of Education is doing is incredibly amazing. The fact that he puts all the emphasis about educating people about modern anti-Semitism, the fact that today, 2022, in London, anti-Semitism is still something you can see in the streets. And this is why I think it's so important to discuss all the things that are part of this big virus that is called anti-Semitism. And I totally agree with Secretary Nadim Zahawi that the only vaccine against this virus is education.
I did want to ask you about the spate. We have seen anti-Semitic attacks in London of late. I believe there was an incident in central London where a gang of men hurled anti-Semitic abuse and spat at teenagers celebrating Hanukkah. And we saw what happened in the synagogue in Texas where hostages were taken. It is still very much a live problem. How do we start to combat it?
Well, first of all, we have a strong cooperation with the British government and with the Jewish Community Trust, the CST, that this is the main goal, to make sure the Jewish community here will be safe. As a proud representative of the State of Israel, I can say that Israel, that was established because of the Jewish connection of 3,000 years to the Jewish people, to their homeland, is committed to the never again promise. Israel is the guarantee for every Jew around the world that this crime, this horrible crime, will never happen again. So we are very much committed, together with the British government, to fight anti-Semitism. But we can't just address the results. We need to understand the mindset that brings anti-Semitism into action. And I think this is where we need to fight ignorance. Some communities are so distant because of the time that passed from the events that happened over 70 years ago, that they don't have even the very basic knowledge about what happened in the Holocaust. This is why one of the most important decisions that was made by the Israeli delegation to the UN was made this year, to extend the fact that Holocaust denial and Holocaust distortion is still part of media, social media, and we want to fight it. And I think this resolution that was accepted by the General Assembly of the UN is very, very important, again, to understand. You need to know the facts, you need to know what happened, and you need to know how in 2022 there is still modern anti-Semitism. And you need to make sure that young people will hear the witnesses. I think one of the most amazing things is to see young people that are around their grandparents taking the new modern version of the witnesses they gave to places like Yad Vashem, the Israeli Center for Remembering the Holocaust, the Spielberg project that Steven Spielberg devoted many years for making the witnesses accessible to people. So I think this is part of the modern education for Holocaust studies and understanding that it's still part of our society.
Okay. Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador, for joining us this morning. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sky News understands the UK is considering sending hundreds more troops to bolster NATO's flank in Eastern Europe ahead of any potential Russian invasion of Ukraine. The former British ambassador to Ukraine from 2008 to 2012 and author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to Diplomacy, Lee Turner, is with us now. Hi, thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. How concerned are you about what Russia might do next?
I'm extremely concerned. We're in an extraordinarily dangerous situation, thanks to Russia having positioned more than 100,000 troops on the borders of Ukraine with obvious potential military intent. And it's a tinderbox, and every additional Russian soldier that goes to the border increases the risk, either that Moscow will launch an invasion because that's what it's wanted to do all the time, or, of course, whenever you have this kind of situation, the risk of something going wrong becomes greater and greater. So we are in a very dangerous situation as we speak.
You spent 4 years as the British ambassador to Ukraine, as we said in the introduction. How is Russia viewed in Ukraine?
Well, between the peoples of Russia and Ukraine, there's an enormous amount of friendship. Many families are intermarried. People from the Soviet era, many people from Russia have lived in Ukraine and vice versa. But since the Russian annexation of Crimea and their invasion or their supporting of separatist forces with Russian forces in the east of Ukraine, in Luhansk and Donetsk regions, enormous hostility really has grown up in Ukraine towards the Russian government. And even in Russia itself, very few ordinary Russians really understand why the Russian leadership seems so intent on threatening Ukraine. And I don't think there's enormous popularity in Russia for an invasion. They can't quite see why Russian soldiers should be dying in Ukraine to achieve some nebulous goal.
What is the diplomatic route out of this?
Well, I think the West needs to do two things. First of all, I think it's very sensible to make sure that the Ukrainian armed forces are as well trained as possible and have the best possible military equipment, defensive military equipment, of course, in order to make any Russian invasion as difficult as possible. The one thing that we know that the Russian leadership really hates is seeing body bags coming back to Moscow and St. Petersburg. And we've seen in the east of Ukraine, in Donetsk and Luhansk, that the Russians have gone to enormous lengths to try and hush up the deaths of Russian military personnel. So the military support is one angle. And of course, it makes sense for NATO forces to bolster their presence in NATO countries on the borders of the former Soviet Union in order to reduce any possible risk of conflict spilling over. But in terms of diplomacy, it's absolutely vital that we keep open the door to discussions to address what are, in some limited areas, legitimate Russian concerns about security. It's true that Napoleon did invade Russia in 1812, and the forces of Nazi Germany did invade the Soviet Union in 1941. And Russia does have things it could legitimately talk about, and that includes, for example, how to make sure that any exercises that either side holds are well advertised to reduce the risk of an unnecessary growth in tension, or arms control. And so there are US-Russia talks going on. There are talks going on in the Minsk group format, which is Ukraine, Russia, Germany, and France. And those are very important too.
So to what extent do you subscribe to the thought, Mr. Ambassador, that put simply, Putin is got an eye on what's happening with China, trying to remain relevant, so picking a fight with the West?
I think Putin's main motivation in all this is domestic. The Russian economy since 2013 has shrunk by about 40% in terms of GDP per capita, so Russians feel much poorer than they did 7 or 8 years ago. Plus, the Russian leadership is very concerned about the fact that Ukraine is demonstrably a much more democratic country than Russia. And we can see that up until 2013, Russia was quite relaxed about Ukraine's growing Western orientation. But after the pro-democracy demonstrations in Moscow in 2011 to 2013, the so-called Bolotnaya protests, Russian policy did a U-turn. And suddenly they started objecting to Ukraine getting closer to the EU, and they've become much more aggressive. So I do think that the motivation of this is primarily domestic.
Mr. Ambassador, good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Astronomers in Australia have spotted something spinning through space, which is unlike anything they've ever seen before. This is what it looks like. Scientists believe that it could be the remnants of a collapsed star with an ultra-powerful magnetic field. Dr. Natasha Hurley-Walker from the International Centre for Radio Astronomy Research says the finding came as a really big surprise.
We spotted this really unusual source, and it's repeating its radio signal once every 18 minutes. So what we think this could be is an enormously magnetic neutron star that's rotating, and it sends out a beam of radiation. As that intersects the Earth, we see it as a pulse switching on and off.
I read a statistic the other day that said something like 60% of UFO sightings are from people coming out of the pub. We've heard allegation after allegation about what Boris Johnson may or may not have done during lockdown. It's now up to the Metropolitan Police and Sue Gray as to what happens next. But this isn't the first time police have investigated Downing Street. To talk more about it is Tim Bale, Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University of London. Hello to you, Professor. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, so the police have been called to the door of number 10, metaphorically, previously.
They have, and the most recent and probably the most famous case was that of Tony Blair during 2006-07, when the police were concerned to try and investigate something called the Cash for Honours affair, whereby the Labour Party had supposedly persuaded some people to convert what were donations into loans and therefore didn't have to be declared to the Electoral Commission, in exchange for being promised a seat in the House of Lords or some other honour. The the investigation went on for months. I think it was 14 or 16 months. And Tony Blair was actually interviewed during that investigation. But the important thing to say is that he was not interviewed under caution. He was interviewed as a witness. And very interestingly, Blair made it very clear at the time that had he been forced to be interviewed under caution, then he felt he would have to resign as Prime Minister. Something which I think is pertinent and relevant to today's case.
And what difference does it make if the Prime Minister is questioned under caution by the police? What difference would that make for his standing?
Well, that indicates that the police suspect that the person themselves has committed a crime rather than being a material witness to said crime. So I think that suggests, if you like, and probably would in the court of public opinion, that said Prime Minister had more questions to answer, if you like, than would be the case if he'd simply been interviewed as a witness.
Yeah, I was looking at the latest polling yesterday after work, and the Prime Minister's polling is lower now than Jeremy Corbyn's was when he lost the last election in 2019. Have previous leaders managed to bounce back from a position like that?
I think it will be very difficult to bounce back from this low base. But I should remind people that actually Boris Johnson's personal ratings have never been that high, and they've always been very poor when it comes to honesty and trustworthiness. And yet he's still won the election by some margin in 2019. Now, obviously, leaders make a difference to people's voting calculus, but the leader isn't the only thing. The party's brand makes a difference. How the economy is going makes a difference. People's social and cultural values make a difference. So there are all sorts of things that go into the mix when people decide who to vote for. So simply having an unpopular leader or having a leader who's got problems in particular areas doesn't necessarily condemn a party to defeat at the next election. But I think those ratings for Boris Johnson are very, very worrying.
Did he win or did Corbyn lose? I mean, that's a whole different discussion for another day. But as far as Keir Starmer is concerned, up against him, we saw it yesterday in glorious Technicolor when it was Prime Minister's questions. He's a much more softly spoken man. Looking back in history, we like our leaders to be charismatic, don't we? Did I read somewhere that politics is show business for ugly people?
You did. But some other regularities have to be observed, and that is when parties decide on a new leader, which of course may still happen, although Boris Johnson did supposedly very well at PMQs yesterday. Conservative MPs may still, after the Sue report comes out, decide to mount a vote of no confidence. But when leaders are replaced, they're very often replaced by a rather different character. So, for example, Margaret Thatcher, this iconic figure, was replaced by John Major, who some people saw as a rather greyer figure. And you can see examples of this even when we look at Tony Blair, for example. Gordon Brown, a very different kind of man, very different kind of politician, replaced Blair. So there is, if you like, this sort of pendulum effect when parties are picking leaders. And although charisma matters, competence matters an awful lot. And there's an awful lot of research from the political science community which suggests that although we talk about, the rise of social and cultural values, this sort of realignment that we see in UK politics, actually people still value competence and the idea that, these guys are going to do a better job of managing the country, and in particular managing the economy, than the other guys.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for taking the time. We'll chat again, I hope. Thank you. Let us know your thoughts on any of the stories that we're covering here on Sky News today. You can tweet me directly if you would like to at Sky News. Lots of you tweeting already about my interview with Therese Coffey. If you haven't seen it, check it out on Twitter. Quick look at the weather.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Fine for most today, but the south will be grey and damp for a time. There's more rain heading for the north for Friday.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
OK, have a look at these pictures, see what you think. Going once, going twice. Not sold. Here we go. This is Melania Trump. She's found a difficulty auctioning off this bespoke hat matching her white ensemble. The former First Lady put the one-of-a-kind hat up for sale on her website, but only managed to draw 5 bids, with the winning bid being $80,000 less than her minimum asking price. It's thought most bidders were sceptical of Mrs Trump's promise to donate a portion of the proceeds to charity. It was what she wore when Macron came to town. Also, John Rendell, who was famous for taking his pet lion, which he bought from Harrods in the 60s on adventures around London, has sadly died at the age of 76. The lion named, do you remember, Christian, and was a common sight walking around Chelsea and a popular guest at parties. He was returned to the wild in 1970. No toilets in the wild for you, young man. And sadly, he has died. An iconic picture, that one. Still to come, we are going to be looking in more detail about what the government have said this morning about taking animals out of Afghanistan. Stay tuned for more.